Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. Now, when we left off, I was giving the gears to landlords in this province and famous landlord Kevin Falcon, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe landlords have it tough as they extract the household earnings from their renters to finance their purchase of a stable, appreciating asset like residential real estate. Here to give the other side is a real estate agent, analyst, commentator, and advisor to policymakers and real estate developers alike. He's always making the rounds in local media as his business is among the top 1% of Greater Vancouver realtors, and his weekly newsletter reaches several thousand readers. The founder of the Saretsky Group, he is Steve Saretsky. Steve, so nice to see you.
Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be here.
We let too much time pass for you to come back on, so I apologize, but it is nice to see you in person again.
Likewise, you're looking good.
Thank you. You as well. Okay, I really gave landlords a hard time in the previous segment, but you were telling me that landlords actually have it pretty tough here in British Columbia. So I want you to make your case for why it's not attractive to be a landlord here.
I'll frame this up, which I think is I don't think anyone's ever had sympathy for a landlord. And I'm not expecting that to change anytime soon. Obviously, especially in Vancouver, you look at the last 10, 20 years of equity growth. It's hard to, again, sympathize with the landlord. What I would sort of frame it up for is the other side of it, looking at just strictly from like a numbers perspective. You're saying, the landlords say, so for example, I've had clients that have bought properties 7, 8, 9 years ago, for example.
Okay.
And these are like small mom and pops. And then typically some of them, not all of them, but these ones in particular, have been very cautious about raising rents. They say, I've got a great tenant in there. I just want them to stay. They're always on time. They never call. They never complain. So I've just kind of left my rents. And, that hasn't been an issue because, interest rates have stayed relatively the same for really the last 10 plus years. And so what we've seen now in recent months is I didn't raise my rent for, 5, 6 years. All of a sudden, my variable rate mortgage is up 500 basis points. My monthly mortgage payment, when I was maybe $300 a month positive cash flow in this investment unit. Now I'm losing $1,000.
Right. And to be clear, it's not losing $1,000, but it's $1,000 that they'd be paying out of pocket, right?
Correct.
The rent isn't covering their mortgage anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not like they're losing money in that sense.
Correct. So, you're basically, I don't look at that as a great investment personally. Sure. You're out of pocket $1,000 a month, especially, again, if you have, let's say you have 2 of these properties, that's $2,000 a month potentially. So I think it just starts compounding. So now they're saying, well, what do I do? Because the government says I can only raise the rent, now it's going to be 3.5%. It's just not enough. So it's a lot of the times it's either like it's a forced sale, which now we're in a down market, so it makes it always a little bit trickier. Or it's what we're starting to see is landlords actually getting creative and starting to renegotiate leases and saying, listen, I'm either going to legally move into this place because this is my financial situation, or I have to put it on the market and sell it. And if I sell it, there's probably a high probability the end user purchaser is going to want you to move out because they're going to move in.
But when they're selling their property, especially if they bought 5, 7 years ago, they're probably selling it at a nice profit, right?
Exactly. And in many cases, that is certainly the case. So again, I'm saying it's hard to be empathetic for them, but I would say like in this current environment right here, right now, I think there are a lot of landlords that are caught offside. Because again, maybe hypothetically, they should have been raising the rent every year for the past 5 or 6 years, and they didn't do that.
Right.
And now, because again, the tenancy laws are what they are in BC, which from my understanding and research, are some of the strictest in North America. The landlords are facing these situations, so it's interesting.
And I guess that's fair, but any business that starts, and a lot of businesses that exist right now, are drawing from lines of credit or rotating lines of credit, and those costs of financing have to be taken into account. So again, a landlord is effectively running a business. So why is that burden being put onto the renter as it's their fault, or the government's being is being cruel or not fair? Like, I don't understand the argument when they knew the rules going in, and maybe they didn't fully understand those obligations, but ultimately those are the obligations that the landlord signed and agreed to.
Yeah, you know what? I actually look at it two ways. It's interesting because, again, you just have conversations with people that are out there. We have conversations with just mom and pop landlords, and some of them, I'm talking institutional level. Mm-hmm. And I actually think that the way our tenancy laws are set up, they definitely in the near term they favor the tenant, right? I think they are pro tenant. We're like, okay, you can only raise the rent this much. It was obviously more under the Liberal government now, and so it's changed in that regard.
Sure. Okay.
So it's more, I think if you talk to the landlord tenancy branch, the rules are set up to be more pro tenant than pro landlord. And there's a lot of bad landlords that get around those rules and whatnot.
Yeah, there's bad landlords and there's bad tenants. Yeah.
So when I'm saying that is, I think ultimately, I think it's also partially a natural throttle on supply.
Okay.
And so, because if you think about it, right, if you're gonna say, well, the downside is almost unlimited, but we're gonna cap your profits. Anytime you're capping profits, you're not necessarily incentivizing the free market to open up the spigots on new supply. Mm-hmm. So when you actually talk, I'm saying this like as a legitimate conversation.
Sure. Yeah.
Is that when you talk to these sort of larger institutions and people that are deploying large pools of capital, they're buying apartment buildings at 3% cap rates. The thesis is that there's a natural throttle on supply. It's just a hard market to oversupply. And so we feel that over the long run, rents are going to continue to go up. And yes, you have to wait for tenants to willingly leave to reset those rates higher.
Because there isn't an incentive to build more supply? Is that what I'm
Exactly.
hearing?
So I'm just saying this. So I think like in the near term, I do think the tenancy law is set up. They are pro-tenant. It's good for the tenant. But I think over a longer run period, I think this is why we continue to see, despite all these rule changes, is that rents continue to push higher.
But in an environment where there are more investor buyers of property, whether they're institutions or mom and pop landlords, more than first time buyers, wouldn't that market then be taken by first-time buyers who have been priced out of the market?
Yes, and I think what's interesting is on the investment side, there's a lot of people that are upset about pre-sale condos and stuff. That's actually, I think, a failure on the policy side as well.
Okay.
The way that we get new supply to market is through the pre-sale channel, and so in the way that pre-sales have been sold, especially in today's market, is at highly inflated costs, and these investors are basically just out there speculating and thinking they're going to make a profit. And it's worked tremendously well over the last 10 years, but you can hold me on record here. I think people of pre-sales are going to underperform over the next 5 to 10 years.
Interesting.
I strongly believe that if you bought a pre-sale condo in many circumstances, you will make little to no money over the next 10 years.
Wow. Okay. Shifting gears here really quickly, we know that in BC, we're changing the short-term rental rules. Basically, you can't have an investment property as an Airbnb unit. If you do have an Airbnb unit, it has to be like in your own home, a spare bedroom or basement suite, something like that. Is this going to have any significant impact on the cost of rent? And I don't necessarily mean that it'll bring down the cost of rent in BC, but will it slow down what seems to be the escalating costs of rent?
I think it can slow down the rate of growth in rents. I do believe that. I don't think it's going to make the market more affordable. I'm not convinced. This is my personal opinion. Could be wrong. My personal opinion is I'm not convinced that it's as large of a problem to drastically alter the rental market here. I do think it certainly is impacting the market to some extent. I think it's being used as a little bit of a scapegoat in terms of what are some of the larger problems that we're facing.
So what are some of the larger problems?
I think that Canada's population growth is growing at the fastest rate since 1957. When you pull in 1.1 million people here over a 12-month period, you're exacerbating a housing crisis. So I think the immigration side, we've seen the federal government come out in recent weeks and saying, okay, now we're going to start to look at tweaking this. Obviously, we've been fundamentally, I think, underbuilding over the last 10, 15 years. And so I think those are some of the larger issues. And Airbnb, we're seeing obviously cities across North America now grappling with this issue. I do think there needs to be some regulation. And it's hard to draw a line of where do you draw the line on Airbnb? Do you just outright ban it? I don't know. I don't really know necessarily the solution. I'm sure we can dig into that a bit, but
so you're painting a very doom and gloom picture for the near future when it comes to BC's housing market and BC's housing crisis. What I'm hearing is it sounds like it's going to get worse. Is that your projection?
My opinion is that, I guess it depends on worse for who.
Well, worse in terms of we're not going to be able to build the supply. Effectively, we are going to see home prices go up. We're going to see the cost of rent go up. That's what I'm gathering from what you're saying. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say so. I think my personal view is in the near term, in the very near term, over the next 12 to 24 months is I think interest rates at mortgage rates at 6% are going to slow the rate of growth in this housing market. We're probably going to we are in a downturn. I think that's going to continue. I think that you might see some rents come off.
So this is good stuff,
right? I think we'll see rents come off those. I think because the economy is weak, and when people start losing jobs, what happens is you leave your 1-bedroom condo, you go back in, you move with mom and dad, and so you get this household consolidation, similar to the pandemic, right? Why did rents drop downtown? It was because people started losing their jobs and everybody moved back home.
Right.
And so people that were renting out studios, they went back and lived in mom and dad's basement or what have you. And so there became a lot more available supply in the market. So I think in the near term, I think over the long run though, I'm talking like 10 plus years, I think you and I will be sitting in this chair and still talking about the lack of affordability in this province.
I hope that in 10 years from now, you and I are sitting and chatting about the housing market, but hopefully not with those circumstances. Nonetheless, I appreciate your time and I appreciate the trajectory and the projection that you've just given us. So thanks so much, Steve.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure.
Folks, if you're not following him on social media, you're missing out on a wealth of knowledge and analysis. He is, of course, real estate aficionado Steve Saretsky. Now, after some business, let's pay tribute to the Airbnb hosts throughout BC who are being hard hit by the province's new short-term rental rules, because Angela Valiant is ready to serenade you up next.